Flagstaff into the 1960s along with my grandmother, and so I like to refer back to my roots and to the tremendous sense of community service and stewardship that we all have for our communities. And to that end, when I was appointed to the judiciary in 2001, I immediately began to form alliances with area agencies, Victim Witness Services in Coconino County, the Northland Family Help Center. There's a tremendous amount of agencies, community members, and outreach efforts to address crime and its destructive aftermath. And so I'll get into just a few statistics. My role here this morning will be to kind of lay the framework and some of the definitions of restorative justice to help get a handle on what the program means, what its implications are for the future, and then my colleague Elizabeth will give a more practical application and her program that she is involved with and has been very successful here in Yavapai County. So I thank you for this opportunity, and I'll just start with I thought it'd be helpful to identify three types of justice systems that are currently in use, particularly in the industrialized world. The first is retributive justice. That's the one that is most common in the United States, the one we're most familiar with. It's also known as, punitive-based and in other circles, retaliatory-based justice systems. It's based on punishment and, again, is the most common type of justice system used in this country. Next, there's the second that I'd like to just sort of describe and outline is distributive justice. Distributive justice has its merits. It's often also used in the United States. It's an effective European model as well, particularly for drug and alcohol-related crimes. The United States and Coconino County in particular has DUI drug court-based programs that are distributive in nature, and it compels certain program requirements on offenders to meet to avoid either violation from probation and ultimately prison sentences for these drug and alcohol offenses. So that's a step in the right direction, I believe, as well. Although there are some dubious applications of distributive justice, particularly toward our mentally challenged or mentally deficient population. And so that's another discussion, but oftentimes distributive justice is a forced process for those with mental health deficiencies. And so in its application toward drug and alcohol related crimes, it has its benefits, but there's also its detractors in other circumstances. And then thirdly, the subject of today's discussion is restorative justice. It's based on restitution, reparation, rehabilitation, and is commonly in use by especially matriarchal-based societies like the Navajo. The Navajo have a peacemaking program. The Maori have a family group conferencing program. You may be familiar with either one of those, where there is a more holistic community-based approach to crime and its aftermath, and so I'll get into how those programs work. Specifically the restorative justice programs here in the United States, and then Elizabeth will speak to the program that is especially I am proud of and have seen the successes of here in Yavapai. Both the punishment model of retributive justice and the treatment models of distributive justice focus almost exclusively on the actions of offenders and largely denies victims and the community as a whole in the justice process, and maybe involving merely a passive participation by offenders. Restorative justice, on the other hand, focuses on the harmful effects of offenders' actions and actively involves victims and the community, and not least the offenders, in a process of reparation and rehabilitation. It's a more full circle, holistic, everyone's involved, everyone has a stake in the outcome, everyone has an interest in the success of the outcome, and when you have that kind of investment and that kind of interest in this reparation of harm, then you can imagine the benefits that can go into addressing crime and its aftermath. Succinctly, restorative justice is a process whereby all parties with a stake in a particular offense come together to resolve collectively and collaboratively how to deal with the aftermath of the offense and its implications for the future. I think one of the most disturbing aspects of crime as a community is what it's done to our confidence in the justice system, what it's done with our confidence with each other. And if we can come to the table together and discuss the implications for the future and how to move beyond the aftermath of crime, then there's much more of a sense of healing, not only for the victim who is the beneficiary of reparations by the offender and by the community as a whole, but also restoring the confidence of the community. Restorative justice seeks to do as much as possible to, well, restore the situation. That's its basic premise. The community offers aids to the victim, the offender is held accountable and is required to make reparation, and attention is given not only to the outcome, but also the process that respects the feelings and the humanity, the human condition for which we're all invested in, I hope, of both the victim and the offender. The process seeks to recognize not only whether an accused offender has violated the law, but also why they have done so. What are the social and the cultural aspects that have led to crime? And how can we address those as a community in helping to reduce recidivism, that is, of course, repeat crimes, and restore confidence as a community. Our contemporary justice system certainly has its merits. There is, in violent crimes, in those crimes which require getting people off the street, incarceration, that is a given. There are a number of people that are in prison today that absolutely deserve to be there and absolutely deserve to stay there. But particularly with nonviolent offenders for low-level offenses, we have in the state of Arizona. Arizona, by the way, has the top incarceration rate in the West. Arizona is the top spender on prisons. Arizona is the fourth highest in percentage of budget. 11% of our general fund goes to incarcerating offenders. The national average, by the way, is 7%. And the highest rate of imprisonment comes from zip codes near South Mountain. And you think about the demographics of Phoenix, and particularly the South Mountain area, and you know that our population that is least benefited by the socioeconomic status in the state are the most likely to be in prison here today. Contemporary justice systems simply do not adequately address all the injuries surrounding crime. Crime is not simply law-breaking, it also causes injuries to others, not least the victims and also the community as a whole. And injuries exist on several levels and are experienced by everyone in the community, including the offender. And with low-level, nonviolent offenders, sure, there has been harm also to the offender. Incarcerating those offenders is just setting up for further failure and is actually hardening these folks who are incarcerated, and ultimately is adding to the problem rather than resolving a problem. Our current policies and practices of criminal justice focus almost entirely on the offender as a lawbreaker, filtering out virtually all aspects of crime except questions of legal guilt and punishment. And so in the hallways, after we get a guilty verdict in the courts, everyone's high-fiving each other, and the prosecutor is putting a tick on his file, and yes, justice has been served. Meanwhile, you have a victim and you have the community that is reeling from the act and that is unfulfilled, and the implications for the future are daunting. How do you move beyond that? Well, restorative justice differs in a number of ways. It views criminal acts more comprehensively. Rather than limiting crime to lawbreaking, it recognizes that offenders harm victims certainly, communities obviously, and even themselves. It involves more parties, rather than including only the government and the offender as key roles, it invites victims and communities as well. And it measures success differently. Rather than measuring how much punishment has been inflicted, it measures how much harm has been repaired or prevented in the future. Nonviolent offenses against the community, for example, Arizona until recently had a law, loitering to beg. And in Flagstaff in particular, it was particularly and aggressively enforced. Undercover plainclothes officers would be downtown Flagstaff and would approach indigent individuals, and if anyone even so much as used the old line, "Brother, can you spare a dime?" that involved a full custody booking, prosecution for a criminal offense, and that just continues the circle of inaccess to opportunity and to poverty. And so I was delighted to see that with the ACLU's involvement that is no longer a prosecuted offense. And so to that end, there needs to be alternatives to restrictive sanctions such as punishment. There is a rehabilitative value in requiring offenders to give restitution to the community, particularly up in our indigenous population, up on Navajo and Hopi. Chapter houses are a cohesive and elder-based community gathering where offenders can give reparations back to their communities. They can have the benefit of guidance and spiritual guidance and physical guidance and opportunity to give back to their communities. And that in turn leads to a more sense of fulfillment in both the offender and the community. Restorative justice can further be defined as a broad term which encompasses a growing social movement. I think we're making steps in the right direction toward addressing crime and its aftermath. And listen, this is not an all or nothing proposition. It's not either all retributive or all restorative. There are steps we can take, and which I employ in the courts each and every day, to recognize what the social and the cultural background or aspects are of an understanding of what has happened or why a crime has been committed, and then working with the prosecutors and with the defense attorneys to come to an agreement where there is a more holistic and full circle approach to resolving the legal harm. Other aspects of restorative justice can range from international peacemaking tribunals on a more global scale to innovations within the criminal and juvenile justice systems, schools, social services, communities. Schools are also rife for employment of restorative justice tenets, and are being used with counselors and with group circles involving parents, involving educators, involving counselors. Has been very successful in addressing harm, particularly school bullying. These steps that are being made are just really encouraging to know that there is a wider application that we can use in the community as a whole. Restorative resolutions engage those who are harmed, wrongdoers, and the affected communities in search of solutions that promote repair, reconciliation, and a rebuilding of relationships. First, I think that's most important, is how we rebuild and how we restore our relationships with each other. Restorative justice seeks to build partnerships to reestablish mutual responsibility for constructive responses. And there's an important point I'd like to make about what the community's role is, and I'll get to that in just a moment. Restorative approaches seek a balanced approach to the need of the victim, the offender, and the community through processes that preserve dignity and the safety of, first and foremost, the victim, and then the community as a whole, and also the offender. It's based on bringing together the victim, the offender, and the community. All have equal parts in addressing and or repairing the relationships damaged by crime. Generally, the offender is held accountable to the victim for the criminal action and has accountability as well to the community. And that's why community-based reparation, what we call community restitution, or community service, if you will, has been effective in bringing the community back into a confidence whereby we can move beyond the act. So three basic steps toward restorative justice. First, it requires that we work to heal victims, offenders, and communities. And I know some of this is repetitive, but I have to stress that all parties have a stake in the matter, and all parties have a responsibility. It's part of our social cohesion. It's part of our social contract. And that is generations encouraging and enlightening and educating successive generations in responsible choices. And that's part of what we have a responsibility to do as a community, because it's going to be successive generations that are ultimately going to be deciding social policy that's going to affect us in later years. And so it's incumbent on us to nurture and to educate and to enlighten those individuals, successive generations, in responsible choices. Second, victims, offenders, and communities should have the opportunity for active involvement in the process as early and as often as they wish. And third, we must rethink the relative roles and responsibilities of government and community. And here's the point I want to make in that. In promoting justice, government is responsible for preserving a just order. The community is responsible for establishing a just peace. You take a community like Flagstaff with 60,000 people, and you have a police force of a couple of hundred officers. Do you think that for any moment that a police force of a couple hundred officers could overcome a rebellion, a revolt, or a disturbance by a community that large? No, it's up to the community. The community has the responsibility for establishing and respecting and maintaining a just peace. And that's how the community is involved at that level, at a deeper level, at a more involved level in addressing individual acts of deviance. Anyhow, my next paragraph is the steps to restorative justice, but I'd like to leave that to my colleague Elizabeth to further explicate before she gives the practical aspects or the practical application of some of this framework that I've laid into her program. But last, just a couple of, and by the way, I'll suggest this as a future program for DOOR. Diane Post is out of Phoenix, and she gives a wonderful presentation on the privatization of prisons. It's a scary trend, and it is corporatizing prisons and making human beings its chattel. We're being turned into a commodity that is supporting the privatization of prisons, and that's a different discussion. But I think some of the steps that restorative justice takes will help to avoid that going down that path. Just a couple of more statistics. In the last 20 years, the population for the state of Arizona has increased 100%. In the same 20 years, our prison population increased 1,036%. Our recidivism rate is 46.7%. The national average is 40%. Nonviolent offenders, the ones that we feel, that those of us that are invested in restorative justice, nonviolent offenders make up 1/3 to 1/2 of all state prisoners. We are 5% of the world's population, and we have 25% of the prison population. The impacts on families, peak crime rate is 15 years to 25 years old. Keeping along past that achieves nothing but hardens criminals and is turning hardened criminals back onto our streets. Families go on welfare. It turns into a constant circle of a poverty trap. Families become estranged. Social disorder increases. The crime rates in neighborhoods. Lastly, on the impact on children, 1 in 33 children in this country has a parent in prison or jail on any given day. It disrupts bonds, it separates siblings, it triggers residential instability, it causes ostracism from peers. The communities that particularly that have the highest rate of incarceration of its members are those who are the most responsive for a community-based address to crime. These are cohesive communities, these are often extended family communities, and these communities are the ones that can benefit from a more holistic and restorative approach to crime. There's impacts on public safety, and it goes on. That's I think a subject for another discussion when we talk about privatization in prisons. So I thank you for your attention in my kind of laying out the framework. I'd like to let Elizabeth go ahead and give her presentation on the practical aspects, and then take your questions, only because I think with what I've laid out and with how Elizabeth explicates how that is actually put into practice, that may answer some of the questions that you have. And for the sake of efficiency of time, I'd like to introduce my colleague, Elizabeth Yancey. Thanks for your attention.
Warren, maybe move this over a bit. Elizabeth, do you want the pseudo program here? Yeah. You do? Okay, great. So I think most of you folks know Elizabeth. She's the one who puts us in handcuffs when we do bad, and you know, things like that. But now she's reformed and she's going to talk about restorative justice.
Not really reformed, for those of you who know me. Good morning. Thank you so much for coming today to hear about something that is so dear to my heart, such a meaningful part of my life. I really appreciate your attention and your time and this opportunity. I want to thank Steve, too, wherever, there he is, for inviting us to speak to you today about this. And also, of course, Warren gave you a great overview of the conceptual framework of restorative justice. So, before we go any further, I would like for you to think for a moment over the last few years and determine if you have gotten into any kind of serious trouble with anybody, whether you were prosecuted for a crime, or the person didn't speak to you ever again, or you didn't want to speak to them. Think back. How many of you have had something happen in your life that was surprising, perhaps, or kind of got out of control, and you ended up in some kind of serious rift in a relationship with someone, or maybe even criminal activity? Just think about that for a second. I'm not going to ask you to raise your hands because we have the police outside. No. If we think back over our lives, we realize that life is full of conflict. Oh, and by the way, before I forget about it, today is a National Conflict Resolution Day in the United States, sponsored by the American Conflict Resolution Association. Just so happened they picked the perfect day to have us here. Because, indeed, that's progress in my world. As we look back over our lives, we recognize that conflict is a part of life. And restorative justice allows us to get down to the real heart of our conflict with another person. Whether this is a result of harm that's been done by a young teenager, vandalizing, taking advantage of someone, stealing, using drugs and alcohol, dealing drugs and alcohol, shoving his mother against the wall and trying to beat her up. Whatever the conflict is, there is a way to get to the heart of it and to resolve it. And I believe that just about every person in this room knows exactly what I'm talking about, because you're Democrats. Maybe I'm just biased, but I truly believe that within all of us, there is a willingness and a desire to connect with each other. In fact, neuroscience over the last few years, those of you who keep up with this stuff, know that there are all kinds of reports out now that neuroscience has delved into the recesses of our brains and determined that we are hardwired to want to belong, to want to connect to each other. And if we think about as an infant when we're born, we have no power whatsoever except what we can elicit from screaming our lungs out. And the world, our environment, our parents, our culture acts upon us to a far greater extent and far more deeply than we can act on it or act on the culture or on our parents or even in our own lives for years and years and years. So we're all shaped by our culture to one extent or another because of that. And at the same time, we have needs. We arrived here with needs, and one of those is to belong, and one of those is to connect. And that truly is the heart of restorative justice. Let me just tell you for a moment. First of all, would anybody like a little break? I mean, we've been yammering at you for a while. Want to stand up and move around? No, you're ready. Okay, terrific. My friends will tell you that you're really going to have a hard time shutting me up, so I just thought I'd give you giving you an advance warning here. So, what is our program? Who, what, when, where, how? That's what I want to share with you today and invite you to think about. I want to invite you to consider participating with Restorative Justice in the Verde Valley. We just recently became our own 501c3. We're no longer under the auspices of Cornucopia Community Advocates, which is where we've been since we started in 2005. And so we have a new organization, and we are wanting more and more facilitators. And we need more facilitators, very much so. And we need your help in other ways as well. So I would like for you to consider that as I go through the program. So who are we? We are all volunteers. We have one paid director. This is Northern Arizona Restorative Justice. Our facilitators are all trained. We have a 3-day training. It's spread over 3 months with lots of on-the-job training in between the formal training sessions. So we have continuing education for our facilitators every year. Facilitators voluntarily take cases that come to us through the juvenile court system, directly from juvenile probation. They determine whether a young person who violates the law, we're only allowed to have people under 18 right now, mainly because we don't have the facilitators to go to the county attorney and say, we would like more cases with adults because we don't have the facilitators to handle the young people cases we have right now. So we get the cases from them. They decide based on some of the criteria that Warren was mentioning, prior violent history, prior problems with the law. Most of the young people that we receive as referrals for our program are first-time offenders. And the average age is 15 years old. They're most all are boys, although the girls are gaining on them. Most of them come from homes, as you might expect, where there's a single parent and where there is no caring, stable male role model. Most of these young people who come to us as first-time offenders at age 15, we are thrilled to see that they've made it to 15 years old without having any prior contact with the police or being arrested prior to that. I think that's a real accomplishment for some of these young people. Many of them are in CPS custody, the custody of the state. And so, needless to say, for those of you who are familiar with these sort of circumstances, this means that these young people are coming from highly unstable home lives, and where there is a lot of stress. There's financial stress, there's health stress, there's employment stress, there's relationship stress. These young people are coming from this environment into our schools and into our community and into our lives, and they don't have skills to make good decisions. What restorative justice provides to these young people, to all young people who come through our program, is an opportunity to be looking at the decisions that they made that got them arrested. They don't come to us to be punished, to be shamed, to be blamed, to be labeled as bad kids or bad people or throwaway kids or losers or whatever other label that we have unfortunately given to young people over the years. These young people come to us, and because we have the opportunity to work with them through a referral from probation, and our goal is to help them examine the mental process that got them to the decision that they made to steal $600 earphones from Walmart, or to take spray paint and ruin the outside of a car, or to shove their mother up against the wall and try to make her head go through the drywall because she wasn't going to let you take the $50 that you found in her purse. We want young people to be safe. That's a big part of restorative justice, is for us to create an environment for them in that circle where they do feel respected. Because if we're not respected, are we going to share anything about what really matters to us? No, not even as adults. We're very selective, most of us, about with whom we are going to share our deepest thoughts and feelings, particularly if we know we did something wrong. Oh, and by the way, we don't get kids who want to contest the charges. We only receive referrals of young people who have admitted to the police or their parents or to probation that they in fact committed a criminal act. The young people who want to contest the charges have the same right as everyone else. They will have the opportunity to go to court and require the prosecutor to prove them guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. That's our traditional legal system. They still have all those same rights. If, on the other hand, they want to admit that they committed the offense and they want to take responsibility for having done that, and they want the opportunity to learn from the experience and to end up with the charge eventually being dismissed if they don't get rearrested between the time we get the case and we get finished with the process, that's the opportunity we offer them. And that is through an agreement with the county prosecutor, Sheila Polk, as well as Tanaz Wheeler, who is here on this side of the mountain. So let's go back and talk a little bit more about what actually happens in the circle. I'm not going to bore you with how we actually get there because you can find all of that out when you come talk to me about being a facilitator or a volunteer. I'll be happy to share all that. So when we're in the circle, the first thing that happens is we go over the ground rules and we introduce everyone. And our ground rules are just what you would expect. When you don't know people, when you're anxious, when you don't know what to think about what's going to happen and you're a little scared and you're already feeling shamed, even though we're not actively doing anything to make you feel shamed, you want to know that you are respected. So one of the first ground rules we operate with is there's to be no blaming by anybody against anybody else. There's to be no shaming. No, you should have known better. That's right. Yeah, you've heard that before, I'm sure. Well, maybe not you, but I certainly did. Anyway, all of these things help us to create a safe environment for these young people. Their families are there with them. That also helps them to feel more comfortable in that environment where there are two facilitators I've never met before. Most of the time, although one of us will have gone to their home prior to that to see if they do want to participate, because our program is voluntary. The next thing that we require is that everyone keeps whatever is said in the room confidential, and that neither young people nor their parents will use anything that's said in that circle to push buttons when they get home. That's very important. As you can remember back when you were a teenager, I have no trouble with this part. Being scared to death. If my mother talked to the mother of my best friend, that when I got home I was going to be in a lot of trouble because mothers talk to each other. So that presents or provides us with an environment in which they can feel safe. They can know that they are respected. They can know that they're not going to be called names and nobody's going to be, well, why did you do this? Well, why didn't you do that? Which is how, I don't know if you know people that do that, but I do. In those kind of contexts, in that kind of situation. So the first thing that happens is that we ask the young person, after we go over the ground rules, we ask the young person who broke the law to tell us what they did. And we get everything from, well, yeah, smoke some weed, to, well, where do you want me to start? You know, we get the whole range because young people are so different, just like us. Some of them want to tell you from the day before when they got a text from a friend saying, hey, I just got some marijuana. You want to, get together, and the others don't want to say anything. And so it's our training that helps us to learn how to listen in such a way that they want us to hear their story. After they've told us their story, we have questions. We try to draw out, had you thought about what might happen if you got caught? Typical question. Usually it's, no. Well, let's talk about that. What could have happened? Let's talk about what the possible alternatives might have been if you hadn't gotten caught this time. What do you think? How would you be thinking about it then? How would you be thinking about it if only your mother or father knew and nobody had called the police? Or if the owner came out to the vandalized vehicle and saw it and said, hey, come on over here, I want to talk to you. What would you have done then? So we explore with them all the possible consequences. And part of this is we're asking them, well, what do you think would have happened if the owner had come out? Well, what do you think would have happened if the security guard at Walmart had come up to you and said, son, I want you to put those earphones back on the rack, the ones you've got in your pocket, because you don't have money to pay for them, do you? Let's talk about that. How would they have responded? And we go through the whole process, every step of the way. And one of the questions that I really get some good information from them is I ask them, when did you have an opportunity to decide not to do this? Let's talk about that. When you got out of the car and came into Walmart, could you have stopped and said, Mom, I'm not going in there with you. I'm just going to wait in the car. Could you have done that? Would this have happened if you'd made that decision? And go through with them what the options have been and how many opportunities they've had to choose not to make that decision that caused them to get arrested. And now having them go through this whole process. After we do that, if there is a victim like Walmart, and Walmart has been very cooperative with our program, they send a representative frequently to our circles because they want the opportunity to help these young people grow and learn as well. And that, again, goes back to the heart of restorative justice. And that's something that's so missing in our retributive system of justice, isn't it? We don't look at when a person makes a mistake, and clearly creating harm is a mistake. It's a tearing of the social fabric. We don't ask them, we don't expect of our system to create an environment that's positive out of this negative. We don't even think about it because of where we came from. It's a big deal in the world still to have the right to have a lawyer represent you if you've been charged with violating the law. It's still a big deal in many parts of the world to not be kept in prison if the state cannot produce evidence that you violated the law sufficient to convince an independent third person, that's us, the judges, that you violated the law. If you can't convince a judge of that at the outset of the charges, you're released in the United States. So I'm not here to criticize our traditional justice system. I think it's time and that we've evolved as humans. We've evolved to a place where we want more from the institutions that we all grew up with. When I went to law school, it never occurred to me that there could be an alternative to the traditional legal system. I thought it was the most fabulous thing I'd ever heard of. I loved it. I thought, this is so exciting. People have rights. As a woman, I have rights, even though there weren't that many people in the early 70s paying attention to that, but later on they did. And we can change things. We can make the world a better place based on our current legal system because our rights are respected in many cases, not always, unfortunately. Now we know that there are other ways of resolving harm and taking care of harm and building the community, and we expect there to be the opportunity for a positive outcome, not just for the community and not just for the victim, but for the offender, for the person who committed the offense. Some of you may have read the New York Times article that was in the paper a few months ago about the parents of the young 19-year-old girl who was shot in the head by her boyfriend, how that girl's parents went to the parents of the 19-year-old boy who murdered her, who was in prison, and said, let's sit down and talk about this. And of course it took place over many days because there was such grief and such pain on both sides. And eventually they asked for a mediator, someone to come in and do a restorative justice circle with all of them, including the young man who was in prison. And the state allowed that, the prosecutor allowed that. After all of those meetings had occurred and the families had expressed their feelings, and especially the parents of the young girl, the victim. They told the prosecutor that they had reached an agreement that they were going to ask the prosecutor to ask the court to only sentence him, I believe it was to 15 years, because he was facing the death penalty. And the parents, because the parents of the girl had such compassion, it's mind-boggling to me to have that degree of compassion. They had a restorative circle. The prosecutor wouldn't agree to the 15 years. He agreed to 20 years, and I believe that was the sentence that was eventually imposed. But that is the power of restorative justice. That is the power of forgiveness, of compassion, and of recognizing our mutual humanity. And even in teenagers, they know when we don't respect them. They know when we don't treat them the way that we treat each other. They get it. And they don't like it any better than we did when we were teenagers. They want to be seen and they want to be heard. Going back to the circle, I'm jumping way around. I'm just totally gone. Going back to the circle, after the young person has had an opportunity to explain and take responsibility for their decision, their mistake, the next person that's asked by the facilitator to share how they were impacted is, of course, the victim. And that young person now must sit in that room with all these other folks and listen to the victim tell them and look them in the face as they say, "That was my favorite car. I love that car more than any car I have ever owned. I saved and saved and saved to be able to buy that car. And then I had all this reworking and restoration work done on it. And you came along and destroyed it with spray paint and kicking the sides. And why did you do that? What was it? Why? Why that car?" And actually it was several little boys that were that particular case. This was one of the first cases that came through restorative justice. And their answers, there were 5 of them, I believe. Their answers, every single one was, "Well, we didn't mean to hurt anybody. We were just wanting to have some fun." And by the way, those kids were 10 and 11 years old. All little boys. All from single-parent homes. One set was, 3 of them were brothers. Single mom. Little or no supervision. No stable, caring male in the home. Never had been. This was after school. These people that owned this car were so touched by listening eventually. That's the next thing that happens after the victim gets to tell how they've been harmed and ask any questions they want of the young person. Then everybody else in the circle, all the community members, even maybe the arresting officer would be there, the facilitators, anyone can ask questions of the juvenile and can explain and share how they have been hurt by what has happened, how they were harmed. And this young person has to sit there and listen to that. So people that tell you that this is all, everybody gets together and sings Kumbaya, do not believe them. This is very hard for these kids. And most of them will sit there, especially in the beginning, they come in with hoodies and their hair is long and they come in like this. And by the time they leave, they're looking us in the eye because they are respected and they know that. They know that we appreciate them and their courage. And I tell them right up front, as I think all the facilitators do, I acknowledge you for having the courage to own up to a mistake. And that you are not a bad person. You made the wrong choice. Just like everybody else in this room has made the wrong choice from time to time. So they know we respect them and they respond to that. Anyway, after everybody goes around in the circle and shares how they've been harmed, and we take a short break and we come back, and the next thing that we do is we go around the circle again and we ask, what do you need to have happen? What do you need to repair the harm that was done to you by this bad decision or wrong decision that was made by this young person? And often we'll have, more often than not, we have 2 or 3 or 4 or 5. We had one over in Prescott. We've expanded into Prescott. The first case we got in Prescott was 9 kids at a party on the 4th of July that were throwing little homemade bombs and firecrackers into the fire pit that they had built for the whole all the families and little bitty kids running around. These were, I think, 12 and 13, 14-year-old boys. Anyway, so we go around for everyone and ask, what is it that you need to have happen to repair the harm that was done to you? And we ask that of everyone, and in particular, of course, the identified victim gets to say what he or she needs. And this couple that I was telling you about who had the car that was this beautiful restored, I forget the type, but anyway, said, well, after they had heard all the stories and how the moms had been impacted and sat there while the moms cried, we didn't have a dad at that circle, and said how disappointed they were and how ashamed they were because that's not how their boys had been raised, and how angry they were that their boys had done something so damaging and so thoughtless to everyone there, to the people that owned it. This couple found out that these kids had no supervision after school. And so what they did at the end of the circle, after they had said that they want just the deductible paid, because they knew the moms were going to pay it because the boys were too little to work. So we worked out an agreement that the boys would do yard work for their neighbors and earn money that way, and they would do babysitting for their moms because they all had younger brothers and sisters and get money that way, and that they would pay back their mothers who were going to have to pay the deductible for this couple's automobile insurance to repair all the damage, and that was over $500. So that was still a substantial burden on the families. But these boys were going to work to make enough money to pay their mothers back. That was part of their agreement. So after that is done, we write up all the terms of the agreement, all the tasks that the offenders have to do in order to restore the person who was harmed, all the people in the circle who were harmed, including the community, including their parents, including themselves. We know that when kids break the law and they know they're doing wrong, that they harm themselves. And so one of the aspects of the agreement is they have to come up with something to repair the harm to themselves. And usually it's something based on a strength that they have. And we have them fill out an assessment, a form that tells us what those strengths are. After that's done, everyone is asked to sign it. The circle ends. And then the boys, in this case they were boys, have 60 days within which to complete all those tasks and send the written acknowledgement or documentation that they've completed all those tasks back to our organization. When we get those, we review them, compare them to what they agreed to do in the contract. If they complied with everything, we send that off to probation, and probation dismisses the charges. The charges still remain on their record, but they are listed as dismissed rather than as convicted, which is what they would have been had they gone through the court process and admitted responsibility in the court process. In our process, because we're considered a diversion portion of the juvenile probation department, they do not have to, I just got caught because some friends of mine who are here today, wonderful Democrats who have helped train me in how to do public speaking and Toastmasters. One of the big things we're not supposed to do is say or and that's why I just looked at them like, oh no, have I been doing this all along?
You're doing a wonderful job.
So thank you guys. So after that, we send the information back to probation. The charge is listed as dismissed, and I understand the military and most employers will not consider a charge if it's dismissed. They only consider convictions in terms of denying kids opportunities, which Warren referred to, of course, a couple of times. This is the kind of denial of opportunities that our traditional legal system results in now, in this world. Any large corporation, if you have a felony, and some of them even misdemeanor convictions on your record, you don't even get an interview, let alone get hired. Big companies, Motorola, GE, all of these huge corporations will not do that. The military won't take you if you have a misdemeanor conviction for drugs or alcohol. I don't know, and I think violent offenses, I don't know about shoplifting, but I know for drugs and alcohol or violent offenses, assaults and that sort of thing, they will not accept a person who wants to go into the military. They can't get into a lot of colleges if they have convictions for these things. So we by allowing our justice system, and it is ours. Don't forget that. It is our justice system, both of these that we have, all of the ones that we have, and they're not going to change until we demand it. We as citizens, because it belongs to us. If we want to look at what justice really is, doesn't it include an opportunity for there to be a positive outcome? Not just locking up and punishing the person who harmed someone else. As a culture, as a society, isn't it time that we said, let's recognize that we're all human and we've all made mistakes. Hopefully none of us have made mistakes like that 19-year-old boy did. But we've all made mistakes. And we want to have that humanity, that vulnerability considered for anyone else, because we recognize that we are all the same, that we're all part of the same humanity. That's the process of restorative justice. Our organization, as I said, has been around since 2005. Last year alone, 2012, we had 70 cases referred to us. So far this year, I'm thinking we're already around the 35 to 40 mark. I'm not positive. I didn't go back and count each of those that we've received so far. We have, this is the part that I just really want you to remember. The recidivism rate for our program is under 14%.
Wow.
So what I'm saying to you is restorative justice saves all of us money. The more restorative justice we can have in our culture, in our community, the less we're going to spend on prisons, on prosecutors, on defense attorneys, judges, jails, sheriffs, police departments, law enforcement. And the real benefit is the safer we will all feel when we go home at night and go to bed. Because those young people that sit in a circle with us and sense that we do respect them, that we do appreciate them, that we do not label and blame them. So they're not coming out of that circle wanting revenge against any of us. They want to do well because they know we believe in them. And if you think back again to when you were really young and just starting out, how important it was to have someone that believed in you. And we really need men to participate because they so much need men to tell them, you can make it. I believe in you. I know you have what it takes to make it. The other part of this whole process is if you interview victims, after the victims have participated in the circle and after they've received and see the intention of these young people and the actions of these young people to make amends, to make up for the mistake they made, those victims will tell you that they are far more satisfied with the restorative justice process than this typical, our traditional legal process. They're not seeking revenge on these kids. And there are two other aspects that I can't remember right now, and it's in here somewhere. But they also, okay, well, I can't find them. But there are two other factors that victims that are very positive about the circle and about the process. We are having this, I'll tell you this, and then any questions, Maureen and I will try to answer your questions. And thank you, by the way, for your attention. I really appreciate it. Northern Arizona Restorative Justice is having our first annual Rummage for Rescue sale in this parking lot. The people who own Sedona, Old Sedona Bar and Grill, fabulous members of the community. They are hosting on November 2nd this huge yard sale or garage sale or whatever rummage they're calling it, Rummage for Rescue, because the folks who own Old Sedona Bar and Grill are deeply involved with animal rescue. And so there will be, I think, Red Rose Dog Rescue and maybe the Humane Society, and I know there's one other animal rescue organization I can't think of now, and Northern Arizona Restorative Justice. We will all be here. And if you come over to our part, you will find great shape. We have a lot of office furniture. We have flat screen TVs that are being donated. We have clothing, we have tools, we have toys, we have electronics, we have recordings. November 2nd, it's a Saturday, 9 a.m. to 3 p.m., right here in this parking lot. So please come and support Northern Arizona Restorative Justice. Also, I think that you received, or you got some envelopes and some brochures. The envelopes are opportunities for you to donate. I want to invite you to consider supporting Northern Arizona Restorative Justice with your hard-earned money. We cannot do this. We cannot create our own organization, pay for the insurance, pay for the printing, pay our one paid director, the rooms, the phones. We cannot do this without your support. And I invite you to consider making a donation. I would love to talk with any of you about being a facilitator, being a volunteer at our Restorative Justice events. We're going to be expanding our program in the coming year, hopefully to include parenting classes for parents of teenagers, because you all know when we get to be teenagers, we're like, no, it's not going to do it. No, I'm fine. How was school? Good. I was all right. So we want to help parents of teenagers be able to reconnect with them. And again, thank you for your attention. I know I haven't covered everything, so if you have questions, I'll be happy to answer them. I'm sure Warren will too. Please go ahead.
My name is John Biggers. For 10 years, I represented kids in Pima County Juvenile Court, about 1,000 kids, including a 14-year-old girl who killed her brother. An 8-year-old boy was accused of sexual assault. That kind of case. And also a case where a brother shoplifted his lipstick for his sister. I thought that was a nice thing to do. But you know, I want to say, Elizabeth, as a lawyer for over 50 years, I have never heard a presentation so inspiring in this context as you do today. Yes. Thank you. I plan to volunteer. I know I represented probably 800 boys and a couple hundred girls in Pima County. And all of them virtually did not have a male in their life that they could look up to. All of them. And I hope all of them in here, I don't care if you're 83 like I am or 63 or whatever you are, I hope you will seriously consider this because some boy's life depends on you. And Elizabeth and Warren, I cannot tell you how proud I am. When I was in law school in Illinois in the 50s, no women in law school. How things have improved. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yes, ma'am.
This summer, there's a groundswell of this kind of thing happening across the country, I think, among
Yes.
legal people.
Yes.
Because this summer I attended a session at the Chautauqua Institute in New York, and the whole entire week theme was on crime, punishment, and restorative justice. And the crime and punishment stuff was in the morning, and the restorative justice stuff was in the afternoon. Big name people, judges, professors, lawyers. I mean, yes, it's a movement, and there are. One of the things you didn't mention, guys, was the politicization of this. That it all started in the 70s, and one of the things we don't really realize or people don't know is that it was a Nixon strategy. They were tough on crime, particularly the drug stuff, to get the then Democrat South, the Southern Democrats, on his side. So in the 70s, all of those numbers and huge things for drug incarceration started, which is devastating to whole communities in urban centers. But anyway, two books that people really need to look at, I think. One is The New Jim Crow, which I'm sure you're familiar with.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
The other is,
Well, we could talk about the percentage of people of color in prison. It's just, it makes us all want to.
And the other is The Other Wes Moore.
The other,
The Other Wes Moore, M-O-O-R-E. He's a journalist who grew up in the city and became aware that there was a Wes Moore incarcerated for drug crimes and stuff that, I mean, they're same name, totally different trajectories, and he had almost gone that path. And as a journalist, he got to meet and over time interview and become a friend of the guy in prison. So that is a book that deals with the what ifs, and if those choices had been made differently, why is his situation so much different?
so the New Jim Crow is what you're recommending, and the other Wes Moore. Two books. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Sally?
Unfortunately, I have to go. I am the fellow Toastmaster that she's talking about, and she did an excellent presentation. I'm a retired special education teacher from New York City, so I know what you're talking about. When I'm fully retired, because now I have another job, I will volunteer. I really understand. So you'll hear from me.
Thank you, Sally. Thank you for coming today. Yes.
You talked about the plan to have a project in place to help parents of teens. Is there anything in the future of the project to help young single mothers, empower them and help them learn how to raise their children in, a more structured manner?
Responsible.
Yeah.
The question was, is our program planning on developing training or assistance for young teenage mothers to help them learn to rear their children as responsible citizens?
Actually, any young mother,
Any-
any mothers of
Any young
single
mothers?
mothers.
Yes. The answer to that is no, it is not. However, Math Force provides parenting training for people of all ages. It's free here in Yavapai County. You can contact Math Force. You can go online to their website, MATFORCE. And Buena Vista Children's Services, also online, provides parenting classes as well. And so both of those are available. I don't know if there is a charge for Buena Vista or not. I don't think there is, but you might want to look at that. And we need to get the word out about this because young parents are lost, just like we were. They didn't get a manual either. And unfortunately, many of them don't have mothers and grandmothers and grandfathers and uncles and aunts around to help them like we did. So, thank you.
I just want to say a couple of things. I was actually a supervisor for junior probation for about. I was a supervisor for junior probation for 5 years here in Yavapai County, and I worked with many of these kids. And I saw. I wasn't aware of your circle. I wish I was. But I saw the other side of them dealing with this, and that we were out there picking up litter in the parks and so on, and we really didn't have. I always felt, we went with about 12 or 15 kids, and all they did all day was talk about, planning about what they could do in future. I mean, it was very negative, in other words, and we didn't have that relationship with them. So one of the questions I was going to ask you is, what is the relationship with the probation services, and how do you deal, how do you work with them when you're on the restorative side and they're on the punitive side? That's my one question. The other one is, I'm a big, big believer in getting to the kids beforehand and mentoring. I'm a big believer in mentoring. I was involved with Goodwill Industries. They have an amazing mentoring program that was up in Denver. And I worked with one girl for 3 years. I actually did it for 8 years, but one girl in particular, and she graduated from high school, and she was on her way to doing great things. And when I got her, her mother was in prison, she was a drug addict, and she was trying to look after the rest of the family. I mean, it was a mess. This was like a 15-year-old kid. So mentoring, and also, I don't know if you have any comment about Big Brothers, Big Sisters. I'm trying to get involved with them. But those are the kind of organizations maybe that could work with you as far as trying to learn off of you and helping these kids before they do something, which is what you were saying about stopping taking the earphones or whatever.
Thank you, Angela. I appreciate the reference to Big Brothers, Big Sisters. I hadn't considered that. My understanding is that they are out beating the bushes every day to try to find people to volunteer to be especially Big Brothers, because they have enough Big Sisters, but it's the men that are involved with other things that they're having a more difficult time with. It's still worthwhile, and thank you for that. With regard to your question about probation and their approach with kids and our approach, I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name.
I didn't give it.
That's why I didn't catch it. The lady in the back was saying, this is a growing social movement, and it is a huge umbrella, as you probably concluded listening to Warren speak about the principles and how it has evolved. Actually, my understanding was that one of the first users of this whole concept of community conflict resolution were the Maori. And I have been told last year that not only is it being used by the Maori, but New Zealand as a country has adopted restorative circles or restorative justice as a form of justice for all of their juvenile probation cases, all of them. And so has the state of Colorado. The state of Colorado has laws and have had for 20 years. In fact, we have to thank them because the person who came here and started restorative justice, Lana Leonard, in 2005 came from Colorado. She was one of the directors of the first program in Longmont, Colorado. And our system and the way we do things is modeled after their program. Having said that, probation has rules. They have restrictions, they have requirements that they must meet, certain number of hours of face time with every juvenile assigned to an officer, certain number of programs provided, all these assessments about what's going to work and what isn't. Their hands are to a great extent tied, and I am happy to tell you the director of juvenile probation for Yavapai County is a man who is not only smart, but has a heart, and they are connected. And he sees the value of restorative justice. We have just been given way more cases by juvenile probation because they are looking at our history and because they're looking at our techniques and they're looking at our recidivism rate. And they can't, the government is like this gigantic ship you've noticed. It's hard to turn it unless you're the Tea Party. And then you can hold it hostage for as long as you want. I guess I can say that freely here. That's what I really think. Anyway, so over time, what we're seeing is that juvenile probation, Yavapai County, is adopting more and more restorative approaches. They're using interviewing techniques with the kids when they first come through the door. It may not have filtered down into those people who are hired to work with the kids on the LEAP program and other programs like perhaps you were involved with or seeing as a mentor. So that is coming. I really believe that Scott Maybury, who is the Director of Juvenile Probation in Yavapai County, will bring in more and more restorative processes and have more and more restorative actions.
How about one or two more questions? We're going to have to run off to the radio station. We're going to do a program on restorative justice. Should be on Democratic Perspective in a couple of weeks.
Thank you. This lady was first. Yes, ma'am.
I've recently heard of collaborative law, and I wonder how that interacts with your program.
Some of the principles are the same from what little I know about collaborative law. It's encouraging lawyers to sit down with their clients and all meet together to look at options and ways to resolve the conflicts that are existing. And usually it's used in divorce or estate settlement cases where the kids, one kid says to the other, Mom loved you more than me, and blah, blah, so I get the piano, whatever. But I haven't done any collaborative law personally, and it's not widely used up here like it is back east, and I think somewhat in Phoenix. So other than just some of the principles of speaking respectfully, sharing the truth, and so forth, I don't know that there's any other specific connection. Yes, sir.
Volunteer next year.
Oh, yeah.
Sarah Monster, thank you. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I just wanted to stand up and speak for probably some of the young individuals who have been involved with your circles for restorative justice, because I was a teacher, I'm a retired teacher, and I have some of my former students coming up to me now who I haven't seen since they were really young, and you are making an impression on those minds. They're going through a process like that. I had kind of a restorative justice classroom, and it's kind of like it really plants a seed of something that awakens in them, something so special in their lives. These were children who had gone through Head Start, who had been in very low-functioning families, who recognize that there's something special in relationships where adults empower them and give them presence and give them a feeling of they are in the driver's seat of their lives, and they will be more and more in the driver's seat of their lives and can make good decisions. It makes a lasting impression. It is very valid. It's so exciting to see children come up and say, I remember your classroom, I remember this, and it's like, yes, it was chaos, but you know, the chaos was meant to give you a life where you make good decisions. So you're doing it. You're having that classroom with them in your circle.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I really-
All right.